Welcome, you're watching World Talks and I'm your host, Kalja Czerwinska. Serbia, regardless of its European aspirations, suffers from a severe case of Russian dependency. Not only the country is a rather toxic relationship with Russia, it is also dealing with waves of protests sparked by the government's lack of accountability and corruption. On top of that, Serbia walked back its support for Ukraine at the latest UN General Assembly. To touch on that more, I'm joined by my next guest, Spasimir Domaradzki, political scientist at the University of Warsaw and Institute of Central Europe. Welcome to the program. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for the invitation.
So President Vučić said he is sorry that Serbia made a mistake by voting for the UN resolution on Ukraine. Why do you think he did that?
President Trump, when we look at President Vučić's attitude, you can get the feeling that actually what he's looking for is to be capable at any time to satisfy all his political partners in the international relations. And this sorry that he expressed is actually a turn towards Russia to make sure that on one hand we do things that the others expect from us, but on the other hand we do not forget that we are with you. And
so to eat cake and to have the cake.
Exactly, and unfortunately this looks much more like a pure opportunism rather than a consistent logic, and on the other hand it undermines Serbia's credibility. The paradox is that with such undermined credibility he's still recognized by all partners as the one in Serbia.
So on one hand, Serbia voted with the democratic world and called Russia the aggressor, but then they walked it back, they apologized. What do you think, what kind of a message does it send to the international community?
Well, let's put it that way. If we look at the internal discussion on that matter, it appears that, first of all, Vučić is able to sell any story. What is even more, his aides are also happily shifting the blame to some lower ranked officials. But on the other hand, the signal to the international community is, well, we are able to play with anyone at any time whenever it suits us. And on the other hand, we have this type of expectation, in particular from the European Union towards Serbia, that it will adjust its foreign policy in accordance with the European Union position on Ukraine, because this is one of the elements that is expected in the context of Serbia's accession to the European Union. However, as we see, even when one step is made in the right direction, there is an immediate counterbalance in terms of excuses to Russians in an attempt to kind of secure and remain in the same spot without jeopardizing Serbia's position.
How do you interpret Vučić's statement, I quote, "We should not flatter any side," end quote?
Well, this is the essence of his opportunism. I have to say that at a certain point I was wondering how exactly Vučić is able to reconcile all these logics that browse in his mind. Because on one hand, if you think the Ukrainian case is very much what Serbia went through. It is a country that is being under attack, that lost territories, and it is a par excellence example of how things should not happen. So it should be, logically a moral duty and obligation to side with the Ukrainians if you claim that this pattern of doing politics is wrong in international relations. On the other hand, you have Russia as the main supporter, actually I would say as the cancer that has captured Serbia since 1999. It is the country that is the sole supporter of Serbia's argument on Kosovo. It is the sole country that promises and backs up Serbian arguments for the non-recognition of the Kosovar authorities. At the same time, it is the country that took over most of the Serbian economy and its particular infrastructural and energetic companies at the expense of this support. So we can imagine that you have these colliding logics, and for Vučić, apparently they're of secondary importance. What is much more important is to be able to say to everyone that I'm your friend.
Basically, the rule seems to be, in case of Vučić, that anything goes as long as it's at the right moment, and it makes sense in his mind.
Well, you're right. I would only add that I think that the bottom line which probably drives his activity is just to be sure that he remains in power, that there is no single side that is capable of finding sufficient justification to start undermining his position. And this is actually a very interesting phenomenon of the authoritarian leaders in the Balkans, that they actually search for international credibility in order to justify their presence towards their own populations. And Vučić, in that respect, can be considered as a role model who shows to his own citizens that he's able to talk with anyone, to bring investments from everywhere, to keep not only Serbia but also the region under his control.
A jack of all trades.
And what else exactly? And what else do you need than such a perfect leader?
What indeed? What do you need? Well, Serbia maintains a very high-level contact with Russia, but is, on the other hand, having those sort of EU accession aspirations. How sustainable is this balancing act when it comes to both sides of the equation?
Well, let's put it that way. Vučić has found his, I would say, place in this difficult puzzle because he is aware of two things. The first one is that whether we like it or not, currently there is no high tide for enlargement within the EU. The EU faces a number of other challenges currently since Trump's election, overshadowed by absolute shock and worries about the nature of transatlantic relations, and hardly anyone seriously talks about enlargement. Now, on the other hand, he knows that the Russians are necessary for him to nurture and endure his argument on Kosovo, to keep this position of still holding in limbo these relations. And if we add to that the fact that the Serbian membership in the EU is conditioned by the resolution of the nature of relations between Serbia and Kosovo, it actually means that if Serbia wants to become a member of the EU, it needs to resolve its relations with Kosovo. However, neither for Vučić nor for the EU this is currently a priority, and in this situation where everyone pretends that this is a priority, there is a place for everyone around in this puzzle.
Vučić, in one of his speeches before, described Serbia as being, and I quote, the most difficult situation in the past 3 years. What are some of the primary geopolitical pressures that are being put on Serbia?
Well, let's put it that way. Serbia is the only country in Central and Eastern Europe that is not a member of NATO. Of course, I'm not adding to that Belarus, but this is a completely different story.
Different case.
If we look at that situation, and there is a quite clear argument in Serbia why they will never become members of NATO because of the NATO airstrikes in 1999. But what really matters in that respect is that Vučić also pursues his own policy, which is roughly brought down to the argument about the establishment or the creation and the existence of a so-called Serbian world. Now, this is the power projection of Belgrade that spills over the neighboring countries, where there is a tangible Serbian minority, where the pace of politics still keeps or holds the connections from Yugoslavia. And these activities in practical terms contradictory with the perspective of membership in the EU. This is also another reason why for Vučić the membership in the EU is a necessary rhetoric, but in practical terms there are no tangible steps that can give us the argument that there is a rapprochement between Serbia and the EU. And at the same time, Vučić argues, if at all, that Serbia is in a very difficult geopolitical situation, it is because the current situation brought one very serious challenge for Serbia, and it is the demand for unity in NATO. The demand for unity in NATO is exactly what the EU wants from Serbia. It is to align its foreign policy with the foreign policy of the European Union. And apparently for Vučić this is a difficult challenge, because somehow he needs to square this circle and wonder how to come out in this geopolitical clash.
So recent surveys show that around 64% of Serbians support the idea of protests, the ongoing student protests taking place. What does this level of support indicate when it comes to Serbia domestically?
We are facing one of the unique moments of Serbian popular mobilization against Vučić. If anything has happened before, I mean, Serbs protest against Vučić once in a while over the last 11 years. But what we observe today is an absolutely unique, first of all, mechanism of protest. Secondly, disconnected from the international situation, absolutely concentrated on the internal matters and on the nature of doing politics in Serbia, which in practical terms leads to all these pathologies that eventually materialized in this horrible tragedy in Novi Sad. What will be the outcome is very difficult to predict. We see how Vučić uses all the available mechanisms in his hands to undermine and to pretend that these protests are non-significant. However, it is also very difficult to say what can come out of social mobilization in terms of political representation.
Exactly. This was my next question. Do those protests actually have a power, a lasting power to bring change to the political landscape in Serbia?
Well, whether we like it or not, this is the challenge that the protesters are facing. On one hand, they are aware, first of all, the Serbian opposition is very divided, and secondly, it is also, to a huge extent, also compromised by the fact that in one way or another, some people at certain points were collaborating with Vučić, which also even further narrows the space for activities. On the other hand, if we look at the nature how protests are organized, it is an absolutely fascinating mechanism in order to prevent the ability of Vučić to break down the protesters. The representatives are being changed consistently. There is enormous freedom of speech, but at the same time, it is not clear who are the leaders, so that the services cannot go after them. And in that sense, we see a completely new phenomenon where we see enormous popular frustration. Vučić is afraid of that frustration. But whether we like it or not, if it is supposed to bring certain changes, it needs to materialize in terms of political action at certain point.
Thank you so much. Spasimir Domaradzki, political scientist at the University of Warsaw Institute of Central Europe. Pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you for joining. And so this would be all for now here on World Talks, but please do stay tuned. We're back in just a moment with more news and features.